Hello and welcome to this Darwin's Medicine seminar. My seminars are about the life sciences industry, pharma, medtech, diagnostics, where I've worked, researched and written about for over 40 years now. I focus on the evolution of business models and strategy, and my aim is to tell you something that is relevant, useful and that you've not heard before. So if I manage to achieve that, then please share this with your colleagues and on LinkedIn. And if you want the longer, more detailed article that supports this seminar, or if you want to know more about my research generally, then please get in touch. All the details are in the show notes. Compared to when I started in the life sciences industry in the 1970s, we live in a hugely different world. Our industry is now global, and no company can ignore the opportunities and threats presented by globalization. But the globalization of our industry also creates a dilemma. You see, although our competitors and customers are spread across the world, market factors such as regulation, healthcare systems, reimbursement systems, cultural preferences all remain essentially local. This global but still local nature of a market creates a problem for strategists in pharma and medtech companies. We have to create the advantages of scale and scope that a global strategy gives us, but we have to do that without sacrificing the competitive advantage that comes from tailoring to local needs and wants. This is the challenge of glocalization. Not globalization, but glocalization. In this seminar, the first in a series of 4, I'm going to introduce the practices of firms that glocalize successfully. And in the next 3 seminars in the series, I'll expand on those best practices. The life science industry has been international ever since it first evolved into the modern industry in the late 19th century. But it didn't really become a global industry until the 1990s, when a period began that academics call Glocalization 3.0. Since then, globalization has accelerated, and that's because of the benefits it brings not just to manufacturers but to health systems and to patients. And by and large, the high fixed costs and low variable costs of making medicines and medical technology mean that profitability is closely related to volume. This makes a global market much more attractive than a national or a regional one. At the same time, all countries want high-value jobs and the export revenue that life science companies create, and consequently, they all favour the sector in their industrial policies. Together, these 2 forces make it less of a question of why should we globalise and more of an issue of can we afford not to globalise. And today, even the smallest life science companies try to exploit global markets. The logic of globalisation is powerful, but it doesn't change the fact that local markets have important differences from each other. Of course, some of those differences are eroding. So, for example, clinical practice tends to converge onto international standards. Distribution channels are becoming more similar in most countries. And how healthcare professionals access information has been homogenized by digital media. But against this trend of global homogenization, there are still important market-shaping differences. This is especially true in the less obvious characteristics of national markets. So, for example, the world is still a very heterogeneous place when it comes to the attitudes towards sexual health. Similarly, only a narrow stretch of sea separates the British, who love pills, from the French, who accept suppositories. And in many countries, especially in Asia Pacific, traditional medicine is still a direct competitor to modern pharmaceuticals. So on balance, a combination of gradual homogenization and persistent heterogeneity mean that each national market retains some of its individuality. This individuality gives marketers the opportunity to create customer preference and competitive advantage. But to exploit that opportunity, marketers need to execute global strategy in a way that meets local needs, which we call glocalization. I've studied how pharma, biotech and medtech companies glocalize, and my research shows that fascinating similarities and differences between those companies that succeed and those that fail. Almost all companies follow a 3-step glocalization method. First, they decide which local markets are more important and which are less important. Then they tailor what they do to the needs of each market. Then they try to share the ideas between the different local markets. But although almost all companies do these three things, the effectiveness of how they do it varies greatly, and it's useful to look at both the good and the bad. Let's start with bad glocalization, which I'll call naive glocalization. In naive glocalization, firms prioritize markets according to their population. Then they address essential things like regulatory and legal requirements. And then any ideas that seem clever are shared between local markets. In my research, this naive glocalization results in only very limited competitive advantage, if any. It doesn't focus resources effectively, and it doesn't use those resources to create customer preference. Despite this, naive glocalization describes the practice of most life science companies, I would argue. Only a few companies have found the secret to fully effective three-step glocalization, which I would call astute glocalization. Astute glocalizations are more sophisticated than naive glocalizers in three ways. First, they realize that the attractiveness of a local market depends on many factors, not just size, and that some local markets are easier to win than others. So they build a portfolio matrix that allocates not only the amount of resources, but also the type of resources between different markets. I'll cover the details of this portfolio approach in the second seminar in this series. Second, astute glocalizers adopt a subtle approach to tailoring to local markets. They don't just think about the tangible needs of the local market, like regulatory, they also think about the intangible needs, such as cultural preferences. And they think about the needs of patients, payers, and healthcare professionals. They then build a multi-layered value proposition around those needs. I'll cover the details of this value proposition approach in the third seminar in my series. The third and final way that astute glocalizers differ from naive glocalizers is in the learning step. Astute glocalizers don't just share and hope that something cross-fertilizes between local markets. They deliberately assess what each local market needs to learn, and they use an appropriate combination of inductive, deductive, and abductive processes to create and share that new knowledge. This is a knowledge management methodology, and the techniques used for it will be discussed in the fourth seminar in the series. So what's the takeaway from this seminar? Well, let's assume that you want to globalize, and let's assume that you accept the need to glocalize to adapt your global strategy to local conditions. And the takeaway from today's seminar is that the difference between successful and unsuccessful globalizers is not what they do, but how they do it. All life science firms globalize in three steps: targeting, tailoring, and learning. But unsuccessful globalizers do it naively, and successful globalizers do it astutely. And learning to be astute means focusing on how you do those three steps, which is what I'll cover in the next three seminars. So thanks for joining this seminar. If you found it worth your time, then please like and share with your colleagues and post it on LinkedIn. If you'd like to read a supporting article, then please get in touch. If you'd like to browse the 300 articles, papers and books I've written about our industry, then please look at my website. And if you'd like to talk about how my research can help you improve your competitive capabilities, then let's set up a virtual cup of tea. I'd love to hear from you.